It begins not with notoriety, but with a quiet criminal trajectory that escalated into one of the state's most brutal robbery murders. By the late 1980s, Heath already carried the weight of a prior homicide conviction, a fact that would later seal his fate in court. In May 1989, that history intersected with chance, greed, and calculated cruelty in Gainesville, Florida, when Heath and his younger brother, Kenneth, crossed paths with Michael Sheridan, a traveling salesman far from home. The three met at a local bar, the Purple Porpoise Lounge, where conversation, alcohol, and marijuana blurred the edges of caution. What appeared casual on the surface concealed a deliberate plan forming beneath it. According to court findings, Heath decided that night to rob Sheridan, viewing him not as a person but as an opportunity. Heath drove the group away from the city to a remote wooded area under the pretense of continuing to socialize. Isolation was not accidental, it was integral to the plan. Once there, Kenneth Heath produced a handgun and shot Sheridan in the chest. Wounded but still alive, Sheridan attempted to cooperate, emptying his pockets in a desperate effort to survive. That attempt failed. Ronald Heath escalated the violence, kicking the injured man and stabbing him repeatedly with a hunting knife. The assault did not end there. Kenneth fired 2 additional shots into Sheridan's head, ensuring death. The medical evidence later presented at trial confirmed the ferocity of the attack. Gunshot wounds, stab wounds, and blunt force trauma, all inflicted during a robbery carried out with intent rather than panic. Afterward, the brothers abandoned Sheridan's body in the woods, returned to Gainesville, and began using his property. The following day, they drove his rental car to a shopping mall and made purchases with his credit cards, behavior that prosecutors would later describe as cold and transactional, occurring within hours of the killing. The crime unraveled through that same carelessness. Investigators traced the unauthorized credit card transactions back to Ronald Heath, eventually locating him in Douglas, Georgia. When law enforcement arrested him, they recovered items purchased with Sheridan's stolen cards, as well as personal property belonging to the victim, including a watch. This physical evidence, combined with witness testimony and financial records, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Kenneth Heath was also charged, but his path diverged sharply from his brother's. Prosecutors and the court concluded that Kenneth had played a secondary role and accepted a plea agreement that spared him the death penalty. He received a life sentence, a contrast that would loom over Ronald Heath's appeals for decades. Ronald Heath's trial began in November 1990 and moved methodically through the facts. Jurors heard detailed accounts of the robbery, the transportation to the remote site, the sequence of gunshots and stabbing, and the use of the victim's credit cards afterward. The prosecution emphasized intent, planning, and Heath's leadership role in the crime. The defense raised mitigating arguments, including substance use on the night of the murder and claims of good behavior while incarcerated, but these points failed to outweigh the aggravating factors. Heath was convicted of first-degree murder, armed robbery with a deadly weapon, and multiple counts of forgery. During the penalty phase, the jury recommended death by a vote of 10-2. The judge agreed, citing 2 primary aggravators: Heath's prior conviction for second-degree murder and the fact that the killing occurred during the commission of a robbery. Those findings carried decisive weight. Heath received a death sentence for the murder, a life sentence for armed robbery, and lengthy additional terms for the forgery offenses as a habitual offender. What followed was not silence, but a prolonged legal struggle that stretched across state and federal courts. Heath's attorneys filed appeal after appeal, challenging nearly every aspect of his conviction and sentence. They argued that Florida's lethal injection protocol constituted cruel and unusual punishment, that the secrecy surrounding clemency proceedings violated due process, that Heath's experiences with incarceration at a young age caused developmental trauma warranting reconsideration, and that a non-unanimous jury recommendation for death was unconstitutional. Each claim was reviewed and rejected. Courts repeatedly found the arguments procedurally barred, unsupported by evidence, or foreclosed by existing precedent. The Florida Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence multiple times, and the United States Supreme Court declined to intervene, bringing direct appeals to an end in the mid-1990s. Even so, post-conviction litigation continued, with Heath remaining on death row as execution dates were postponed and legal standards evolved around him. Life on Florida's death row became Heath's reality for decades. His days were defined by confinement, regimented routines, and the slow passage of time punctuated by legal filings and court decisions. Records indicate that he maintained relatively stable behavior while incarcerated, a point his attorneys raised repeatedly in mitigation, but it did not alter the legal outcome. As years turned into decades, Florida's approach to capital punishment hardened rather than softened. Executions increased, legal challenges narrowed, and Heath's options diminished. In January 2026, the final chapter began when the governor signed a death warrant scheduling his execution for February 10, 2026, by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. The signing made Heath the first person slated for execution in the state that year, placing his case within a broader surge of capital punishment following a record number of executions the previous year. In the final weeks, Heath's lawyers launched last-minute efforts to halt the execution, again challenging the lethal injection process and the fairness of the clemency system. The courts moved quickly, denying stays and reaffirming prior rulings. Each decision narrowed the remaining window, reinforcing the conclusion that the legal system had reached its end point with him. By that stage, the facts of the crime were no longer disputed, the verdict long settled, and the sentence affirmed beyond further review. Ronald Palmer Heath's case stands as a complete arc of the modern American death penalty, a violent crime driven by robbery, a trial grounded in physical evidence and witness testimony, a death sentence shaped by prior convictions, and decades of appeals that ultimately failed to alter the outcome. From the wooded crime scene where Michael Sheridan lost his life to the controlled environment of death row where Heath awaited execution, the story is one of irreversible choices and their consequences. It is not a tale of mystery left unsolved, but of a crime meticulously reconstructed in court and punished with the most severe sanction available under Florida law, concluding with a scheduled execution more than 35 years after the night that set everything in motion.